Welcome to our first Rethink Vertical podcast episode of 2024. If you missed any of last year's conversations, I encourage you to go to uascluster.com and check them out. Our very special guest for today's discussion around advanced air mobility is Toni Drummond. Toni is a highly recognized corporate and private aviation industry expert focused on emerging, advanced, and future air mobility. Toni is a partner at both Prestige Air Group, an aircraft management and air charter company, and at BrainTrust IQ, a revolutionary new aviation-centric AI and machine learning platform. She has a unique background, rich in worldwide corporate flight operations, logistics, compliance, sales, and business development. Her career was spent in executive positions within the world's leading corporate aviation companies until starting her first company in 2008. Toni has a driving passion to enable sustainable aviation solutions and spends much of her time traveling and speaking around the world as a subject matter expert on sustainable flight, UAS operations, electric and hybrid air vehicles, aircraft charter, and advanced air mobility. Toni serves globally on multiple industry regulatory committees with NBA, Emerging Technologies, and she co-chairs the NADA's Advanced Air Mobility Committee. She was named as a 2023 Woman to Watch in Emerging Aviation. So it's one thing to design, build, and certify an advanced air mobility aircraft. It's a completely different thing to put those aircraft in service and make money flying, paying customers. Looking forward to Toni's insight on what this might look like. Hope you enjoy the episode. All right. Welcome to the Rethink Vertical podcast. Excited about today's guest. Toni, welcome to the podcast and excited to have you on the show.
Thanks for having me, Craig. Excited to be here. Happy New Year.
Yeah, Happy New Year to you as well. It's a new year. Lots of things going on in the advanced air mobility world that we can talk about. Before we do that, I think it would be good for folks listening to the podcast to hear a little bit about you. Kind of, we all has sort of an interesting path into advanced air mobility in this industry, and I have a particular appreciation for your path, in the Part 135 side. And so, you want to share a little bit about your background and kind of how you got where you are today?
Sure. So I got my background. I started in aviation directly out of school. I lived in New Jersey at the time, and I started at Teterboro Airport, which is the second busiest general aviation airport in the country. So it was very lucky for me to start there. I had no intention of starting in GA, but once I jumped into working on the airport, I quickly got involved in running companies and doing charter and just really pulling up learning everything there was to know about general aviation, private aviation, and which way it was going to take me. So my background really started very, very heavy in flight operations, sales, and everything there was to do about commercial operations. So that kind of led me to, I'll fast forward lots of years. I started my first my aviation first by myself entrepreneurial company. Actually, I had two partners. In 2008, I started an aviation consulting company called Emerging Aviation. Further down the path, I did a lot of consulting. I really learned a lot, helicopters, all different kinds of things. Brought me to around 2019, 2020. I am now merging with my current Part 135 that I'm a part owner of, which is Prestige Air Group. Pushes me to 2020. I started a drone company to support that, to support part of what we were doing at Prestige Air Group. And that kind of spit me out onto the other side of AAM. So I have a really unique background because I am active in the UAS space. I'm active in the general aviation space, very active. And then, of course, active in the AAM space. So the overall knowledge kind of makes me a unicorn in some of the situations that folks are really looking for solutions. And I absolutely love it.
Right. No, I would like to dig in a little bit more. I think there's a clear delineation that I see in people's backgrounds. Like you've got the tech entrepreneurs that say, hey, this, autonomy is really cool and drones and eVTOLs are really cool. So let's start a company, whether it's building platforms or building technology around that, but they have no real aviation background. And when I say aviation, like maybe they're a pilot, but they've never really worked in a heavily regulated environment.
Yes.
And then there's folks that like have worked in the heavily regulated environment, but weren't necessarily tech entrepreneurs. There are not a lot of folks like you that kind of had that sort of Part 135 general aviation. Like, how do we take these platforms, find customers, and help them make money? Right. That's the big thing. There's lots of cool technologies, but the business models have to play out and they have to fit into this sort of regulatory framework. So how do you as somebody who spent a lot of their professional life in general aviation, how do you, um, what's your vision for how advanced air mobility and these new platforms intersect with like traditional Part 135 operations?
Yeah, it's interesting. I very, very early on when I started when I was doing the drone company and we were looking to do spraying with the drone. So of course, as an aviation company, everything is about regulatory and safety. So I knew
Mm,
straight away that when I started moving into the 137, which is what we get for spraying for agriculture, that I started to really dig in with the drones and said, what are we talking about? If we need regulations for spraying, we're literally going to need regulations for flying. What regulations are we using? So I found out very early on in the game that we were going to be multiplying our Part 135 regulations that we use right now to for private charter, and those were going to be the same regulations that we're operating under. And then once I found that out, Craig, you can imagine my head just exploded because
right.
there's and I love entrepreneurship. I own, by the end of this year, it'll be 5 companies doing all different
Mm,
kinds of stuff in the aviation genre. And I really respect and appreciate the tech world coming together with the aviation world. What I'm seeing now is like the past 4 years of being in this seat. This is the year that people are starting to really lean into, oh, wait a second, how do we? Because right now, let's be honest, when you're
mhm,
talking about advanced air mobility, we need to get these aircraft certified before anything else. So that's been
right.
the priority. Obviously, as you know, getting these aircraft certified, making sure that they're safely certified by the FAA. And then everything else is kind of, leading up, ecosystems leading up to that, whether that's ground or whether that's, where I lean into a little bit heavier, which is the flight operation side of it.
Mm,
We have a lot of people that are unfamiliar with certifications of 135 or what it even means to get a 135 certificate, barriers to
right.
entry that maybe we understand and maybe we don't. So there's a lot to unpack when it comes to it. But the good news is that we do have a framework to push this forward if we make sure that our products currently fit into the framework that we have allotted to do what we're doing already. And
Yeah.
as we scale out, we've already been told by the FAA and others that we're not going to change what we have. It's take what you have and make it fit into the box that we have right now. And I'm sure as time goes on and autonomy begins to really scale out and we're able to prove those safety cases, which is the most critical part of this, that we will see some leniency, hopefully, and maybe some ways around regulatory constraints that are still super safe and effective.
Right. Right. Um, Couple light bulbs went off while with hearing kind of
Yeah.
your thoughts there. One is, so you've got these eVTOL manufacturers right now, and they're they're OEMs. They're also considering doing their operations. Some of them are selling their platforms to larger airlines, but really, a lot of their I mean, just from pure battery life standpoint, they're not even regional transportation options. They're like hyper micro regional operations, which means you need a lot of them operating all the time to make money. And so from someone who's kind of been a part and run a Part 135 operations where you have to sell by the seat, you have to like get the public involved. It's a lot of high net worth earners, and the eVTOL companies are making this play that like we're going to diversify transportation, we're going to open this up, we're going to reduce the cost, and that's all great. How do you see taking the Part 135 sort of concept where you're selling to private individuals? It's not so much like the general commercial airline sort of business model, and then multiplying that by 10x. Like you've got all these,
Yeah.
how does that all play out?
So I'm going to back this up because that was a very loaded question. There's about 15 questions in that
Okay.
question. So
Yeah,
let's
sorry
let's
about that.
back that let me back that up for a second.
Right.
Let's first talk about what you said that triggered me, which you
Yeah.
said 135 sell by the seat. That's a
Yeah.
no-no, to the
Okay.
FAA. The FAA doesn't allow us to sell by the seat unless we are cooperating with the Department of Transportation, and the DOT has something that they've put out called Part 380. It's a
Right.
very, very little, we talked about it. I don't know, we didn't mention at the beginning, but
Right.
Craig and I sit together on the
Yeah.
National Air Transportation Committee board. So we did talk
Yeah.
about that at that last meeting. So
Yeah.
Part 380 is the tiny little piece which is a huge regulatory hurdle for anybody who's dealing with it. It's a mix between, from my vantage point, from a flight operation side, it's a mix between a 121 operation and a 135 operation.
All right.
135 is on-demand air charter, whereas 121 is scheduled. That's your United and American, and 135 is a private airline like mine that has 6 airplanes and or it could have up to 200. So selling by the seat up until 2010, you say, is something that was not even heard of in our industry at all. People started to take effect of Part 380, and with that, there's companies like JSX. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that company. It's a model that has 30 passenger aircraft, and they're using that regulatory body to harness their aircraft and their operation. So it is sketchy, and I don't want to say sketchy, that's the wrong word. It's very, very cumbersome, and compliance is very, very, very stringent, and it's very expensive if you accidentally get the compliance wrong. I mean, that'll shut an operation down. So that's one part of the question. The second part of the question that is, and these are all, by the way, we're in this nascent industry, so we're all trying to solve these problems. We're all trying to look for solutions. The second part of the operation is, let's take a small charter operation like my own right now. And I've worked for lots of operations. In our country, and the way we look at things in the US, a company that manages aircraft, maybe 15 aircraft, that's like a small to mid-sized company. A company that manages, say, 35 to 65 aircraft is like a mid-size. And then above 65 to 200, maybe 250, maybe there's some companies out there real big, like 300, 400. That's it. You're not getting the scale that our eVTOL corporations and all of our OEMs are talking about. It's not at that scale right now. So can we handle it at the scale that we need to at this very second? Of course not. We can't. We're not able to do that. So we are going to need a little bit of that buffer in order to understand and be able to scale just operationally. And when I say, can we handle it, I'm going to take it down just one step further, since my specialty, it really is, moving into the regulation, is that we are depending on our regulators. We're depending on the FAA. You've worked for the FAA. They're understaffed. So when you talk about bringing one aircraft onto a certificate, it's, first of all, starting a certificate is painful. It's time consuming and expensive. Could be years and years to get that going. But they don't just say, here, oh yes, 30 airplanes. You got that right, Jim. Let me sign on the dotted line. You know what they say. Craig, they're like, bring us the first one. Let's see how you can do it. Then bring us the rest. So when you have models like, I'm going to bring Archer in because they have that model with United that's coming up, which looks super exciting. You have a company that understands the model, and you have a company that doesn't quite understand the model, but they are leaning on each other. And even with that, United operates, as far as I know, under 121 regulations, not 135 yet. So you see what I'm saying? There's this like a bit of gray area, and there's going to be a little bit of a lag coming in. So we are going to definitely have some barriers to entry that folks are not thinking about from a regulatory perspective that can slow this down a little bit, which in my mind gives us time to catch up a little bit as well. So that answers that part. As far as business models, let me hit that part up. I am so right on the money with you. A lot of times I'm consulting for OEMs, or I'm consulting, sometimes I take small projects or larger projects, or, consulting for companies thinking that they want to buy 30 vehicles. And they're like, we love this concept. Like you said, we want to get in. And I'm like, great. Where do you want to start your operation? Like, where's the market research? We love New York City. So does everybody else. You know what I'm saying? Or like, in order to I'm going to bring up a great example. And if I'm talking too much, cut me off. That's no problem.
Oh, no, you're good. This is all super interesting.
I love the example of where I grew up in aviation. So I lived in New Jersey. One of the companies that I worked for was called First Flight. It's no longer there, but it was out of Elmira, New York. Now in Elmira, New York, you want to talk about a wonderful regional economic place where it has Elmira here, which is a tiny, small city. Then you have Rochester, which is a much larger city. You have Syracuse, which is a larger city. And then up top, you have Buffalo. So when you think about, now we're not talking about maybe eVTOL as we are STOL, which would, or
Right.
CTOL, either short or conventional landing electric aircraft that have a bit more range,
Right.
but we are talking about actually connecting, right? Those points. So if you're going to bring me a model, or I'm going to bring you a model, I want to make sure that there's people to fly on that model. And
Right.
what can we look at? We can look at current helicopter traffic. We can look at, current light jet or prop aircraft traffic to try to, I know a lot of this just from being an aviator in this country for so many years of where the pain points are, because I felt them for so many years, and I've created shuttle services before. But, these are things that is really important to think about when we're talking about moving into this nascent industry and investing. We want everybody here. There's room for everyone to come in and start, but be creative about what we're thinking about, or hire the right experts to come in and give you the right advice, because we need the right markets to be able to understand. And a market like that, they have a regional airport. Actually, I think they might, that airport has a little bit of commercial traffic. And they understand the environment, the community. They're used to the air traffic. They're there. So now we're going to start bringing in air
Right.
traffic that makes less noise, which there you go.
Right.
So that's a lot of answers to one huge
No,
question.
that was perfect. That was perfect. Sometimes when we're getting into your world, I don't know how many questions I'm asking within one question.
That's okay. I
So I
hope I
apologize.
answered them best I can.
You did, and that was great. So you touched on the noise piece and the public acceptance piece, which I want to talk a little bit about. I want to back up to something that I hadn't really thought about, which was this sort of gray area where you have a large commercial carrier buying or planning to buy small eVTOLs with maybe 2 passengers, maybe 4 passengers. It's probably one family. Maybe they're mixing the flight, maybe they're not. And so it's like this hybrid 121, 135 sort of operation. And, what are you hearing? What is the conversation around, like, are they just waiting for the FAA to tell them like what requirements they're going to have to follow to be able to do that? Or are they saying like, well, okay, we're going to buy this aircraft and we're going to operate under 121 and we're going to sell by the seat, and if all 4 seats happen to be your family, then so be it. I'm just kind of curious about what the conversation going on right now
I
is.
am almost 100% certain, and I don't know all models, just the models that I'm involved with and that I've heard about, but I'm 100%, not 100%, but close to it, that these models will operate under 135, not 121.
Okay.
So
All right.
that gives a whole different understanding. Now, that means that in my mind, and I don't know what the deal is, I'm just speaking hypothetically here, that United would have to either get a 135 and operate their own aircraft under that regulation, which is probably something they wouldn't do. They would probably get a third party to come in there and operate, or 135. Maybe they have already, I'm not sure, in which case they're going to unload their own aircraft so they can operate them, which is strange to me in some ways, not in this genre, because a lot of OEMs are thinking about doing that in AAM. But when we think about GA, or regular aviation, if you will, Boeing sells to United, United operates. Do you see what I'm saying? There's
Right.
that
Right.
middleman. So when we talk about operating, we talk about Joby. I can't use Joby because I don't know anything about their model.
Yeah.
But when we talk about other models, there are certain operators and OEMs that are like, we are selling you the vehicle. You guys go ahead and operate that sucker.
Right.
And then we're going to support you, And then you have others that are like, we're selling you the vehicle and we're operating the vehicle, which is really like bold and gnarly in a way, because that's like you're getting underground, for operations and stuff. It's like, pull your hair back and get into the fight. Anybody, you've worked on that side of the field, ATC, it's like everything's on fire. So I definitely am not 100% clear on how that's supposed to go down, and I can promise you the OEMs are not either. Again, focusing on the certification of the aircraft, and hopefully this year is starting to focus more on the operation. And we haven't touched on it, but you and I are both working a little bit in that with the ground. The ground piece is real important too, especially when you're talking.
Is it's the elephant in the room right now, isn't
Sure
it?
is, right? So, and when you're looking at models like a CTOL, which is the conventional, or an STOL, which is short, you don't need the vertical part of that. You're looking at regular just short runway for taking off. So maybe it is just closer to a charging station on a separate area that's safe. But we're talking about batteries, and that's another conversation for another day. But that's a huge barrier right now, and we have lots of folks like yourselves and others that are working through that that Red Sea, if you will, to try to get us onto the other side. And we've got a lot more walking to do. We're gonna be tired at the end of it. We will
Right.
figure it out, but we're gonna be
Yeah.
tired at the end.
Yeah. No, you're right. The concept of, kind of diversifying transportation to larger parts of the population, and using so many underutilized GA airports that will need additional infrastructure, and so those, like I said, or like you said, that is a whole topic on its own. So as we, I think it's a good lead in to the public acceptance and the noise. I would like to talk. I mean, I just saw last week another update on the Santa Monica airport closure conversation, which has
Yeah,
been going on for
that's
like
been
a
going on.
decade now.
I was gonna
So,
say since I've
so
been in aviation since the late
yeah, a
90s.
long time.
Wow.
But I think it does provide. It should provide some level of maybe anxiousness for the AM industry to go like, look, there are communities actively working to close airports within an urban environment because of noise, and just maybe it's not even noise. I think a lot of folks, I worked on a project when I was in the FA, in the Boston area, and one of them was a noise complaint issue. It was arrival routing changes and departure routing changes and some of the challenges with public acceptance. And what we found was, it folks would say it was noise, but really it was a visual noise, right? So they couldn't really, if you told them to turn and look the other way, they couldn't really hear the airplane. It didn't distract them, but as soon as they could see it, it meant something. Now they're connecting the noise to visually. And so when folks say, well, hey, my eVTOL is really quiet, but is it landing 200 feet over the top of these folks' houses? Like, it doesn't matter how quiet it is if they can see it over and over and over. And it's not, and it wasn't there when they bought the home, right? So
Right.
um, I'm curious to know from your perspective, and as much as you've been involved in general aviation and public acceptance, how do you feel this is all going to play out? Like, what should we be doing to help folks understand that there's value there and not
Yeah.
just annoyance, right?
So, first of all, I personally don't like the term public acceptance. I feel like we're
Okay.
forcing the acceptance on them. That's just me. A lot of people,
Yeah, yeah,
most people use that term. What I have found when I'm speaking to public, a lot of these consultant projects,
yeah,
one
yeah.
part leads into the other, right? It's it's public permission. Okay, let's be
Yeah.
honest.
I like
Nothing
that.
will
Yeah.
shut
Right.
us down quicker than the public. The public
Right.
is our biggest enemy, as they are our biggest cheerleader at this point.
Mm-hmm.
The main goal for the public, and let's talk about Santa Monica. Now, again, somebody
Mm-hmm.
that's been in aviation, do you know what a pain in the backside it is to have passengers have to drive that whole route instead of just flying into Santa Monica? Now they got to
Right.
fly into Van Nuys or LA
Right.
or whatever. There's
Right.
a couple of small air Burbank, but it's just a
Yeah.
pain. They can't get
Yeah.
to where their homes. But that specific situation was all about noise.
Yeah.
Yeah, visual a little bit, but it was mostly about noise because those aircraft coming in as short runways, like 3,500 feet.
Yeah.
You can't take
Now,
big,
right? It's
yeah,
been
right.
reduced, right? So now it's
Right.
35,
So
right?
once they started bringing it down and cramping it down, now
Mm.
you only have prop aircraft going in. It's actually making the problem worse. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? So that type of situation, right off the bat, we need to go into communities and explain to them how this is going to help them and get their approval and get
Mm-hmm.
their permission to come into their territories. And again, from my perspective, I'm not really very heavily into the urban air mobility sector that
Mm-hmm.
much. I look more into regional air mobility. That's what we do with our
Right.
general aviation fleet. We operate 6 small aircraft right now, and those aircraft are running the same routes that eventually our eVTOL.
Right.
Some of them are 30 minutes, some of them are, and ours is right outside Las Vegas. So we're going to
Mm-hmm.
California. Like, I can tell you in
Right.
your
Right.
head what those are going to look like, right? So, and
Right.
I'm also going to tell you when we're going to move new vertiports, if you will,
Mm-hmm.
into a city. If you can't prove the economics behind it, don't bother going in. Which
Sure.
means that in some of these cases, we're going in, some of the consulting jobs working on maybe it's connecting state governments with OEMs that want to create manufacturing plants in their states. So now we're bringing in a huge economic development. We can prove to the constituents of that state that we're bringing in right off the bat, without these things even flying in the air, we're bringing in 100,000 new jobs, 20,000 new jobs.
Yeah.
That's money talks. Talk to them about how this is going to help them and what it's going to do. And that's just at a state level. I mean, honestly, if you move this into a, obviously, if we're able to take that a step further and move that into a third world country, you're changing the index of a country by adding an AM vehicle. You and I both know what that can possibly look like.
Right.
The problem I have right now, Craig, and anybody who wants to jump in, there's very few companies like nonprofits that are out there doing that type of education to communities right now. So I find myself down the rabbit hole. I'm consulting, and then halfway through, I'm like, oh my God, we have to have a meeting with the town. That's not my forte. Like, I'm from New Jersey. I don't host a meeting with the town. I have no business being there, my mouth, right? But you know what I'm saying? Like, to just be able to coax that through. There's no, governments are not, a lot of states, there's a couple of states that are leading the way, but a lot of states they don't know where to start. How do we begin? Where do we go? FAA,
so
DOT.
It is a very, very difficult job. I know the FAA has, the regional offices that have offices within the regional office that all they do is outreach, and it is it's tough duty. I mean, going in there and trying to, like, talk to folks, not to talk over their head, but also talk in a way that's, like, meaningful and doesn't sound like you're just ramming some operation down their throat. No, it's definitely a business opportunity if you can find the right folks that can do it.
I was going to recommend also for anyone that's listening, if they're looking down that path, is that NASA does an amazing job. They've done so much research on community, just in how to create community, endearment. How do we want the community to love us? Even now, you had Carl on your show a few weeks ago, who is an amazing innovator. Carl Dietrich, I think that's how you pronounce his last name. He's got Jump Arrow, guys, and Jump Arrow is an amazing. It's a search and rescue. So you're giving back to the community. I've always believed, even in the drone world, like leaning heavily into those projects that really give back. We want to build the trust in the community of, we're here to help you. We're here to help your community do better. We're not here to take from you. So, there's a lot, but there's NASA that's done a lot of work, and that's public. You can Google that up and pull out. And there's also Community Air Mobility Initiative, CAMI. They do a good job too. I believe they have some type of program. I don't know if it's free or you have to pay for it, whatever it is, look into that, but Google that up. They have a program that will come into communities and they'll send like a virtual community, like, here's what you need to look for, and here's some starting points. We also have some grants that are going to be coming available for that type of stuff too that I've seen. So
I'm glad you brought Carl up. So
I'm a big fan.
I think it's really interesting, and for folks that haven't listened to that podcast, you should check it out. Just kind of check out Jump Arrow and Carl and his team as well.
Great.
I think there's a really interesting thing that came out of that conversation. And Carl, I've talked a bunch of times other than that podcast, but I asked him, okay, you built an eVTOL company, right? Terrafugia, one of the first, flying car type vehicles, got it through certification. And so when you hear him talk about that path to do that, and he understands how challenging it is, but then, like, he'll tell you that, like, it was getting it type certified was really difficult. Keeping the cost down was exponentially more difficult, but then convincing folks that it was a valuable product was 10x more difficult beyond that. So I asked him, I was like, okay, well, you built Terrafugia, and then you've moved on to Jump Arrow. Why Jump Arrow? Because and he said this, because I know that in order to get the real public approval of this product, we need to solve a really, really difficult problem for the public. And that is first responders, like people dying prematurely because they can't get access to an EMT in a timely manner in a rural area. That is a problem that people are willing to pay a little bit more for if the technology costs a little bit more, and they're willing to. It's just like an ambulance. People don't complain about, like, how loud ambulances are going through their community.
Helicopters. Now remember, when we think about eVTOL,
so if you have a helicopter landing, to take somebody to a hospital from an accident, nobody complains about the noise, right? No. Because they know it's a real value add, right? So I think that's a really key thing to think about. It's like, that's somebody who's been through the other end and now has decided this is once folks get comfortable with this, then we have the ability to move on. And the other thing I wanted to key on, Toni, is your comment about where you work is utilizing general aviation reports where people are used to some level of traffic coming in. And if we increase the number of vehicles, but they're quieter, that's a great thing, right? That is not,
That's my general belief
yeah,
from
exactly,
working at
right?
airports and seeing people picketing Teterboro Airport in New Jersey, where I grew up.
Yeah.
That's where I cut my teeth. Man,
Right.
there's people picketing all the time there.
Right.
There's nobody that even lives in the town of Teterboro. Maybe now there is.
Right.
But there was zero residents there, but just the
Yeah.
surrounding towns. And
Yeah.
and they will stop a project straight in its tracks.
Oh yeah, yeah.
They don't even have to necessarily understand it. So I do lean, even I don't really do a lot of drone consulting. I have maybe one or two projects I'm working on, but one of the projects I'm working on is Promo Drone. I think we've discussed that one. And that one, again, why do I love that? Because it has the community service side of it where we're communicating with the public. And again, why are we doing all of this? Because we want to become more sustainable. And that includes social sustainability, not just environmental sustainability. I'm a big proponent of both. And you know, when we talk about social sustainability, that means how do we sustain our towns and get, you know, our grandmas and grandpas their medications and make sure that people are being taken care of properly in a more effective way.
Yeah. Okay, so we're coming up on the end of our time. I want to ask one more question, and it is maybe it came up during our last meeting, our last NATA meeting that we had, and you mentioned that earlier. What is the view of the Part 135 industry on advanced air mobility? Is it a value add? Is it competition? Like, what is it? Not to set you up here.
Listen, no, it's okay. And I'm embarrassed to say this, but there is no view. Why? Because there is a barrier for the folks in my specific industry. We have hands on our ears, and no one's paying attention to what's going on. And you know how I know that is because I actually have a forum that I run on Facebook that's specific for aircraft operators and brokers. You have to get approved to come in. And when I post anything about advanced air mobility, I just posted something about supernals landing at CES. We're putting an electric airplane. Crickets. And you know what I think it is? It's fear factor. So this year, 2024, now that most people in the past 3 years have said to me, that'll never happen. There's no way they're going to get certified. There's no way they're going to. And so it's that initial, anytime you move a nascent industry, people will say, no, look at the cell phone. I'll never use this. The government's going to listen in on me. You know, now so it's that same type of like initial fear factor of burst of fear. But again, we're going to be sure to educate our Part 135 operators. And now we have drone Part 135 operators too, like Zipline, and there's a handful, there's 10 of them, maybe 8 of them. So those approved operators, like, listen, guys, we're all sharing the NAS, National Airspace. Like, that's all of ours together to share. Nobody owns that, you know, so it's us together figuring out how to do that. So this year, specifically for NBAA, National Business Aviation Association, I'm going to be hosting a panel with some professionals up there to hopefully educate and have folks ask open questions, no fear. Every question's, you know, a good question, because we need and I'll say this again, we need our aviators to work with our tech folks. One of them cannot do it without the other. You know, we need to work together and collaborate. And it's important that these ecosystems and these new nascent, you know, these new aircraft, whether it's hydrogen, electric, it doesn't matter. We need to sustain our industry. We're putting out too much carbon. This is terrible. It's too long already. We need to get with the rest of the world with our sustainable aviation goals by 2035, 2050, whatever they have out there. So this is part of it, a big step.
Yeah, really interesting.
They're not really up to speed yet. By the time we have our first aircraft flying 135 conflicting with their aircraft.
Full on panic, like, oh, I guess we should pay attention.
And you know, let me just hit on this. I know we don't have a lot of time, but just think about it for a second, Craig. As an ATC controller, somebody who's worked in aviation, the amount of new business, I don't want to say new industry opportunities for current aviators that are working within the industry, it starts to really, you know, just explode with different things that you can use your specialties and the things that you've really leaned into throughout your career to help a new sustainable industry grow. So I really see a lot of, you know, future employment and there's a lot for our industry in general to be able to help the new side of this industry move forward, and so we can all play together in the same sandbox. It should be interesting.
Yeah, yeah. Um, we just did a new website update for Droneport Network, and one of the things on the homepage is a little video. If folks want to check it out, it talks about how the aerospace industry has been like so like well defined, and like when people interact with aviation, it is like a very specific way. It's like some private pilots, but very few in the percentage of the population. Most folks don't interact with aviation until they go to the airport.
That's
and they
right.
fly to some destination, and in 5 to 10 years, we're going to be interacting with aerospace and aviation all the time in our daily lives. And it will be such a cultural change for folks
Yes.
that it's like, oh, this is part of my daily life, whether I'm, getting something delivered to my house, medication, or I'm, shipping cargo, or like you said with Promo Drone, like the way I get information is via,
Right.
an aviation vehicle. So I think, folks are in for quite a cultural change and how they interact with the aviation industry. It'll be interesting to see how it all plays out.
I believe we're going to move people off the ground, Craig. I really do. I
Yeah.
mean, in 10 years from now, you're going to have less people, thinking about commuting on the ground. If this works in the way that it's being laid out, and we can make it to a point where it is economical and it is available, people will start using the sky more, which we know it's safer. We've proven it's safer. We know how many people die on the roads every year. So, I mean, that's it's, again, social sustainability. How do we sustain ourselves as humanity?
Yeah. I really appreciate you I know you're busy and you got a lot going on, and so I appreciate you taking out some time and coming on the podcast today. Let's see what the next 5 to 10 years bring for the industry.
Yeah. It's going to be a really fun couple of years for us, especially on this side of the fence.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Toni. Thanks for joining us.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
If you'd like to be a part of the UAS Cluster Initiative community and get access to more of our content, check us out at www.uascluster.com.